series. As Liz said, I'm Susan Hutson. I'm the independent police monitor for the city of New Orleans, and I will serve as your moderator for this forum. And I am honored to participate in this process that will give our community valuable information about their choices during the upcoming election. And with that, let's meet our participating candidate, Meghan Garvey. Meg, as she is called, is a career public defender who has served the people of New Orleans for over 15 years. Meg's legal career began in the wake of Hurricane Katrina when she made her first court appearance on behalf of over 100 people trapped in jail without access to the courts. In addition to the daily work of defending clients, Meg has led the charge for emergency legislative funding for public defense statewide, co-authored a report on the need for bail reform in the state, and led the campaign to raise the age of criminal liability, as well as to keep children out of adult jails. Prior to becoming an attorney, Meg assisted homeless people in a lawsuit by homeless folks who have been charged with things like obstruction of public passageways for merely standing on the sidewalk. Meg worked her way through college as a case manager for people facing homelessness and living with severe mental illness. She is a member of the executive board and the legislative chair of the Louisiana Association for Criminal Defense Attorneys, a founding member of the Orleans Public Defenders, and the recipient of a fellowship by the ABA Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. Okay, and so with that, if it's all right with you, Meg, we will begin the questioning. Now, some of these questions are very detailed and there's some prefacing to them as well. So if you would like me to repeat anything, please just ask. And there's no time limit on your answer since you're the only participating candidate. But if you veer off, I may need to prompt you to get you back on due to the short time limit, okay? So with that, I'll stop talking and we'll go into the first question. Oh, I'm sorry, with that, we'll actually go into your opening statement, which you have a minute for, Meg.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a really valuable opportunity for the community to get, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Are y'all hearing that? I apologize.
I don't hear any feedback, but I'll mute as well just in case my microphone is part of the problem.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, what I was saying was that I think that this is a really great opportunity for voters to learn about the candidates and to learn about specifically municipal court. Municipal court is an extremely high volume court that affects a lot of New Orleanians, and a lot of people are not very familiar with it. But as Susan said, I am Meg Garvey. I'm running for Municipal Court Section A. She went over a lot of my bio, but yeah, I have been a public defender in New Orleans for the past 15 years for children and adults. In addition to that, I have been fortunate to have the opportunity to make a lot of change here in New Orleans and across the state. I have most recently have been very excited to testify in front of the City Council to try to improve some of the policies that we have here in New Orleans. But it's my intention to bring efficiency, transparency, and compassion to municipal court. When I say efficiency, I don't know if everybody is aware, but there is a huge backlog in municipal court. There are twice as many cases as there are men, women, and children in New Orleans, and 1 in 7 people has a warrant from that court. Black people are 5 times as likely to be arrested on those warrants. For transparency, what I mean is that I plan to follow all of the ethical rules so that people can feel confident in the judges and make sure that the court is actually representing the people. And finally, compassion. When I say compassion, I don't just mean being a nice person or having sympathy for people. I mean recognizing harm and taking action. And that means addressing the difficulty that low-income people face with coming to court. Taking public transportation takes over an hour from many places in our city on a good day. Additionally, recognizing the ways that fines and fees can sort of trap people in this never-ending sort of Byzantine system and not being able to get out of the court system. And finally, I think it means being honest about the role that race plays in our system. So that's sort of, that's my platform. Yeah. I think I went over time, so.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that opening statement. And we're going to get into the questions, some of which also address some of the issues that you just brought up. So in what ways do you think technology, such as a texting system to remind those with a summons to appear in court, can assist the court in making its process and procedures more equitable and accessible?
I think it's something to explore. I think right now in New Orleans, we're dealing with what, like 25% unemployment. And so, you know, people may not be able to keep up with their cell phone contracts in this kind of an economy. So I definitely think it's a place to start to remind people about their court dates. I definitely think that we need a lot of improvement to the technology in municipal court. I definitely am confident that there's money out there for such improvements, especially given COVID. I believe that there's federal money to improve a lot of those systems. But to be honest with you, I think there needs to be fewer court dates for people. I think having people come back and forth for misdemeanor charges, which are the charges that municipal court handles, is ridiculous. Yes, there are times when things need to be reset. Yes, it's important to make sure that witnesses and victims have an opportunity to have their day in court along with defendants. But I do think that there needs to be an effort to minimize the number of court dates that it takes to process a misdemeanor municipal charge. So I do think that it's worth exploring the texting, but I don't think that texting is a panacea to solving many of the issues.
And you mentioned that technology needing to be upgraded in general in the municipal court, and I think in other courts. What other ways do you see technology assisting in making the judicial process more open and transparent?
Well, so for example, I mean, this is just one example, but it's not possible for a non-attorney to, like, you can't access information about municipal court. So a lot of New Orleanians are aware that you can go online and track the way that a case moves through the system on a public website when the case is in district court. You can't do that for municipal court. So if you were uncertain about having a warrant, you wouldn't be able to check that in advance. You wouldn't be able to make arrangements in advance or figure out whether you needed to hire a lawyer to assist you in case you had a warrant. So I think that that's one place to start. I think that that would definitely make things more transparent, given that the number of people that come through the court in municipal and traffic court that are not represented by counsel, who are dealing with their cases pro se. I think making sure that all people have access to that information in the public would be a huge start.
Thank you. You talked about this a little bit before, but what will you do to reduce obvious racial and ethnic disparities in treatment by the court system in New Orleans?
Sure. I think the first place that I would start is this. Recently, the City Council, if you go to their website, there is a racial disparity dashboard. And there is data there that talks about disparities in arrests, disparities in sentencing, disparities in the amount of bonds paid across our city. And so I think that is a valuable tool as a place to start. So I would begin by getting into a rhythm of doing a regular sort of racial disparity audit, right? So that we could really kind of drill down and analyze how the decisions that the court makes and how the policies of the court translate to racial disparities in our system. I think that taking a look at that would be a great place to start. Beyond that, I think that from a judge's point of view, you know, a judge absolutely has to be a neutral arbiter. But I think that when a judge is reviewing, for example, a motion to suppress, or reviewing arguments that counsel is making, and sees something that suggests that somebody maybe was the victim of racial profiling, or that maybe there was manufactured probable cause on the basis of race, rather than just kind of sweep that under the rug, I think it's important that a judge make the record and be honest on the record about why they're making a ruling and whether they believe that race was a factor in a decision that a police officer made and that somebody's constitutional rights were violated. Because what happens is that if you don't make that record and you don't make that clear, it's difficult for either side to be able to take the information up to a higher court. And so I think being honest about what you see from that point of view is another good place to start. Additionally, I mean, race is huge, right? Like there's a lot of answers to this, right? And I'm not pretending that I'm going to be able to solve all this in one day, but I think you have to try. I don't think you can just throw up your hands, you know, and be sad about it, right? So another thing that I think is important is that if I see actual misconduct by a police officer, I'm going to report that. I think that sometimes judges want to stay above the fray, and I think that there are specific rules for judges about what they can and cannot do, and I intend to follow all of those rules. But I do think a judge has an obligation when they are bearing witness to certain things, especially when patterns start to emerge, to share that information so that other actors in the community can take appropriate action.
Thank you for that. I may have some more questions for you about judicial interactions with the police, since that's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. But let me go on with the questions that we also have here. And you know, a thing or two about public funding for agencies. Do you support full public funding for the courts instead of relying on bail, fines, fees, bails, fines, and fees to fund part of the court's budget?
Yes. Yes. User pay is the term that a lot of people use when they talk about the fact that we extract money mostly from our poorest citizens to fund our court system. I don't really like that phrase. I use it because it translates and people know what I'm talking about, but I don't like the phrase because we're not talking about users, right? We're all users of the system. The system is meant to serve all of us, right? And it benefits all of us, or it's meant to at least. But user pay, fines and fees as a way of funding things doesn't work. It doesn't work just on a pragmatic level. There have been studies by the legislature led by bipartisan groups. I mean, that study was led by a Republican. There's definitely bipartisan support in the legislature and in the city council for the idea that the fines and fees structure of funding courts has to go. It's unconstitutional. Because it does not provide for adequate funding. It's unethical because it puts, particularly when you're talking about courts, district attorneys, and defenders, it puts everybody in a bad ethical position because they should be making their decisions on the basis of the evidence that comes before them and good public policy, rather than having any sort of motivation for money. And even if some, you know, I'm a public defender and our office is funded by fines and fees in large part. And while I do fight very hard against any assessment of fines and fees or, you know, convictions for our clients, I still think that the average person who is represented by a lawyer that they paid for would have a problem knowing that their lawyer had that kind of a conflict of interest. Also, it takes too much money to collect the money. So for example, we can use municipal court as an example. In 2018, the municipal court brought in, I believe it was 1.5 million. And it takes 1.7 million to pay for a tier of people in Orleans Parish Prison for a year. So that's 40 people. So that's just one example, but you can see that it really is diminishing returns. And finally, it's just a really unstable funding model because there's no way to budget for that. You don't know how many people are going to have to pay fines and fees at any time, right? But it's particularly vulnerable to disasters and emergencies, which sadly we have a lot of in Louisiana. With Katrina, with the flooding in Baton Rouge, we saw all of that. But it's also subject to political whims, because law enforcement can decide that they're not going to write tickets for one reason or another, and then everybody else in the system ends up without money, even if we believe that their decision to prioritize other things than writing people traffic tickets is a good decision. So I'm absolutely 100% against it, which is why I've advocated in front of the Louisiana legislature and the city council to move to another model, specifically when it comes to funding public defense.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing our courts during this time of social unrest and some would say uprising even, and global pandemic? And how would you address this challenge? This is the biggest challenge if elected.
Well, I feel like you're asking me like the meaning of life here. Okay, so what is the biggest challenge? Well, I mean, in terms of like the COVID aspect of things, I would say it's about how do we balance keeping people safe and respecting their right to due process and having their cases move forward, right? I do think that COVID in many ways has proven to be a racial justice issue. And so I do think that is definitely part of the conversation. Obviously, I think exploring technology could be helpful with that. But when we're specifically talking about municipal court, given the high amount of the cases, I think it's like 88% of the cases are more than 4 years old. So well past the statute of limitations. I think we can talk about prioritizing, like, do we want to keep those cases open, or do we want to move on to other things to keep our community safe? As to the social unrest, first of all, I think it's exciting. I don't think it's exciting that we keep seeing terrible things happen and murder by the state of Black people, obviously, but I do think that the reaction and the unwillingness to let it slide is wonderful, and it makes me really happy to see that people are speaking out and that people are questioning all of these things and wrestling with these ideas. I think a lot of what I already said about from the court system just being really honest and frank and measuring data is really important. I think the other thing that's important is that I think that judges should make time to participate in policy conversations, even if they can't directly advocate, for specific legislation per the ethical rules, but to meet with formerly incarcerated people, to meet with community groups that are membership groups that have members who have been through the system, to meet with families who have people who have gone through the system, and really hear what they have to say and see how these things have affected them. And that includes people who are victims of crimes, people who are defendants of crimes, people who are witnesses, what have you. But I think it's just about being really open and not thinking, well, I'm the judge and I know how this is going to go because I've been doing it this way and I don't need any advice, right? I think we all have to recognize, especially as a white judge, right? Like, I have to recognize that I have a lot to learn and that there are a lot of different people that can help me get there.
Okay, then this next question got some multiple parts to it, so I'm going to read through it, but I'm going to come back to the first one after that, okay? If you need me to repeat anything, just let me know.
Okay.
The past few years, there have been numerous stories about prosecutorial misconduct, from fake subpoenas to withholding evidence. What do you think is needed to address prosecutorial misconduct in the courtroom. And if it comes to light that a prosecutor has withheld favorable evidence in a criminal case, pre-trial, during trial, or post-conviction, would you file a disciplinary action against that prosecutor? And would you permit that prosecutor to continue practicing in your courtroom? So going back to number one, what do you think is needed to address prosecutorial misconduct in the courtroom?
Yeah, I think that judges need to hold everybody's feet to the fire, right? I think that judges should remain calm in their temperament. I don't believe that judges should be like jumping up and down and yelling at people, whether they're, the defense or the prosecution. But I do think that judges should make sure that the lawyers practicing before them are not violating ethical rules or constitutional rules. I do think that that is the judge's role. As to whether or not I would file a complaint, I think that I'm ethically obligated to file a complaint when I come in to that kind of knowledge that somebody has violated somebody's rights. Because if I'm aware of that and I don't file anything, not only am I violating the rules of professional conduct, but I do feel that that would make me complicit, right? Because the judge, and you're sitting on the bench, you really are. Well, you're not aligned with the prosecution, but you really are representing the government when it comes to the people that are for the court. And so I think that that would make me almost a co-conspirator in violating somebody's constitutional rights, and I'm not going to do that. There was a second part to your question. Oh, would I allow the attorney to practice in my court? If an attorney is barred, I think I'm going to let them practice in my court. I don't really think that like shuffling them off to another court where they can misbehave somewhere else is the answer to anything, right? But on the other hand, I mean, some of this is a case by case, right? I have to see what the deal is. I think some people may benefit from better training, right? I think that both public defenders and prosecutors, right? Like sometimes, maybe they make a mistake when they're new and maybe it's unintentional. And I think that's a whole different scenario, right? But if somebody is constantly, violating somebody's rights, I'm going to make it known to any authorities for which that's appropriate. But I don't think that just shuffling them off to another courtroom would be my move. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but
Hey, the answers are yours, so that thank
okay.
you for addressing that, and you addressed all three, so thank you. We're going to switch to a little bit of a different topic. The City of New Orleans, as part of its acceptance of funds from the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, committed to reducing the jail population with a variety of strategies and initiatives meant to address the economic, ethnic, and racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Some of these include use of risk assessments in determining bail or bond, preference for releasing folks on their own recognizance instead of bail or bond, and increasing efficiency in criminal cases. How familiar are you with the city's safety and justice challenge initiatives, and how would you continue to support the city's commitments to the safety and justice challenge?
Well, I'm familiar with a lot of it. I did work in magistrate court for quite a while recently, working specifically to try to improve the way that bonds are set and try to reduce the number of people who are being held pretrial, especially people being held pretrial solely because they cannot afford a bond. And so I definitely will bring that experience to bear in my work in municipal court. Bond. What were the other three parts?
So just how would you continue to support it? How familiar and how would you continue to support the city's commitments to reducing the jail population and to address economic, ethnic, and racial disparities?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, with the racial disparities, I think we touched on a lot of those pieces there, but I think just doing like a regular audit, like what's going on in section A. Let's look at our numbers, right? Like maybe they'll be painful at first, right? But like, let's take a look at them. I would be happy to participate in any meetings to which I was invited where it would be appropriate for a judge to participate. And I would be happy to give a report out about what's going on in my section. What are the numbers? Who's in jail? Who's not in jail? And all of the, demographic information there, and help, sort of brainstorm any ways that we can change things. But also, I think that there are very few times when it really seems appropriate for misdemeanors to have people be sitting in jail. And right now, the jail population in New Orleans has gone down to less than, I think it's like 800 some. And so over the course of my career, I mean, at Katrina, it was like over 6,000, right? I don't think that we're a less safe city. So I do think that it is my goal while on the bench to have as few people in jail as possible, and to have as few people who have warrants out for them as possible. I do think that that's an actual goal of a judge. I don't think it's just about, oh, well, people didn't come back to court, so it's not my problem, warrant, right? I think like it's up to me to figure out how can I make the court function in such a way where we're not generating all of these warrants, where we're not generating people having to sit in jail over the weekend because they have an attachment. I do think that is the responsibility of the court. I think it's a challenge. I think it's going to be difficult to kind of shift how we do things, but I do think that that's the responsibility of the court. And like I said, with all of these things, I'm happy to be transparent. I'm happy to have people ask me questions. I'm happy to come to community meetings and report out. And I'm happy to share any data with the group. So I think that those are probably the best ways that I can support the initiative.
And you answered part of this question in that question, but a little bit of prefacing on this one. A person obviously is innocent until proven guilty, but here in New Orleans, on any given day, about 1 in 3 people detained are locked up simply because they can't pay bail. As a result, they are taken away from their families, their jobs, and may be forced to plead guilty, which saddles them with a record for a crime they might not have committed. What is your position on money bail? What will you commit to do to ensure that people are not kept in jail simply because they cannot afford to post bail, and to continue to drastically lower the number of people held in jail pre-trial? And again, you answered some of that a little while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people, think this is really complicated, but it's all laid out for us, and it has been for quite some time, right? I mean, there's plenty of case law from the Supreme Court of the United States that tells us how bond is supposed to work. And I understand that we have gotten into some habits and that we have some customs here in New Orleans, but those are not the law, right? So it is not radical when I say that nobody should have to pay a money bond or be held in jail unless the prosecuting authority can prove to me, right, that this person is a danger to the community such that letting them out, somebody's going to get hurt, right, or that this person has no intention of coming back to court, right? Those are the only times when bond is appropriate. Now, I will say that there are currently laws in place that prevent release on recognizance for certain charges. I have every intention of following the law. I have to follow the law when I'm on the bench, right? But yeah, I mean, so I'm not putting a money bond on somebody unless evidence has been presented to me that shows that there's a constitutionally justifiable reason to do it. And if for some reason somebody does have a money bond that keeps them in jail, right? We're gonna have that trial quickly, right? We're going to get to the bottom of it because these are misdemeanors, right? And so at the time that somebody is arrested, there should be probable cause for their arrest, which means there shouldn't be any difficulty with getting ready for a trial quickly because these are not necessarily very complicated cases, right? Should have the evidence to prosecute somebody at the time that you arrest them. And so when there is money bond, I will try to move towards resolving the case more quickly so that people don't stay in jail. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to sacrifice due process and be really hasty pushing something through just to push it through. I mean, obviously, it's important that we get it right. But those are two ways that I will work to prevent that. Yeah.
A new law passed this year allows judges to decide not to assess a conviction fee. Will you impose conviction fees, if applicable, on those who are deemed indigent and represented by a public defender?
Once again, the law is really clear that you can't put fines on, you can't assess fines and fees. I'm sorry, I'm reverting to my two-lane and broad talk here. You cannot assess fines and fees on people who can't afford them. It's the law. I'm gonna follow the law, right? And like I said before, you're just really creating a lot more problems than you're solving when you just start, you know, issuing out all kinds of requirements for people that they're not going to be able to fulfill. It just creates a mess. It creates chaos. It creates more work for everybody. It costs more than it brings in, right? And it also subs resources out from being able to deal with real charges and real cases where there actually is some danger to the community, right? So yeah, there is a lot of stuff that comes from municipal court that, you know, is not a high level charge, and some of it I don't personally, you know, my opinion is that I don't really understand why it's charged, but there are some things that come through municipal court where people are being victimized, right? And I think if we can cut down all of the nonsense of people just coming in like this revolving door of fines and fees and drama and suspended driver's license and not being able to get back on track, then maybe we'll have an opportunity to give those cases their real due, because, you know, victims do deserve to have their day in court too. Just because I'm a public defender doesn't mean that I don't recognize that. My clients in the past have also been victims of crime often, and I have too.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we're going to go back into it just a little bit again. Why do you think there are over 55,000 warrants out from municipal court? In other words, 1 in 7 adults in New York have a warrant from municipal court, some of which are decades old. How did this happen? How do you fix it?
So on a more philosophical level, I would say that the reason that this happened is that the majority of the people who have the warrants and who have cycled through the court are people who don't have money and are disproportionately Black, and therefore, because of that, do not necessarily have the power to be heard. Sorry, my dog is trying to overshadow me, steal my limelight. So because a lot of the people that are affected are not people with the most power, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that there was a lack of urgency about addressing it, and that allowed it to snowball. And now I think a lot of the players are simply overwhelmed by the task. Now, as to what are those warrants for, I think that first of all, there are a bunch of open cases for begging. That's a charge that was found unconstitutional in 2013. So as to why those cases are open, we're on the same page here. I don't know. I don't know how you justify that. But a lot of the cases are for things like obstruction of public passage, right? These are not necessarily just the warrant cases, but actually, yes, they are. Like 10,000 of those, more than 10,000 of those are for obstruction of public passage. Obstruction of public passage is essentially being in the way. A lot of those charges are from the French Quarter. You know, well over 17,000 are for public drunkenness in New Orleans. And I'm not saying nobody gets out of hand, but You know, and a black man's 8 times as likely to be arrested for public drunkenness as a white man. Over 14,000 for trespassing. Most of those are too old to prosecute. Tons of cases for disturbing the peace, right? So a lot of these cases, I think it's a combination of not paying attention to watching the problem blow up, right? So not getting ahead of it in advance. Now just sort of shutting down and being overwhelmed. I mean, there's been 2 city council hearings about this very issue, right? In which the court and the city attorney had opportunities to present. And neither time did any of them refute any of these numbers that I'm saying here, right? And there wasn't really a plan to address them. And it really just, my impression really did just seem that they were overwhelmed and didn't know where to begin. I also think that, honestly, we just arrest too many people on nonsense. And once again, as a judge sitting on the bench, I do not have the authority to all on my own sua sponte declare things unconstitutional. I just don't have that authority. That's not what our law allows. However, I do think, you know, if somebody were to be able to present a case and present data about something, showing that some of these cases were, you know, as applied unconstitutional, if the proper case was put before me and there was sufficient data to actually prove that, which it is a challenge to actually prove that under the law, but I would be open to looking at that. I think it's important, and I don't want to get off track, but I just think it's really important to mention this, that if you look at the history, right, of misdemeanor courts, and you look at the history of these kinds of charges, and you look at the history of vagrancy charges, and many of these charges seem pretty close to vagrancy charges, those charges were actually created as a reaction to the 13th Amendment, right? 13th Amendment said that you can't have slaves unless they've been convicted. You know, nobody can be forced to do work for free unless they've been convicted of a crime. And so there was an intentional effort, right, to arrest Black people, particularly Black men, on vagrancy charges so that they could be available to lease to, you know, that sheriffs could lease them out, right, as their prisoners, right, to for profit. So it was a direct attempt to re-enslave people. Now, I am not suggesting that the current bench of municipal court or the city attorneys have a conspiracy to try to throw all Black people in jail, right? What I'm saying is that I think we need to be honest about our history and about where we want to go, right, in our future, and examine a little bit more closely. The law is just people. I mean, the system is just people. It's not a force of nature that's controlling everybody. These are things that we can correct and that we can change if we actually put that into it.
You mentioned the role of police in arresting people, sheriffs in arresting people historically. So in thinking about the police, we asked you about how you hold prosecutors accountable earlier for their misconduct. What do you see as the court's role in providing oversight to the police as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I think it's just about being honest when you see patterns, right? When you deal with high volume, right? So I think any public defender or prosecutor or judge, right, or court staff person could tell you this, right? When you work in any of those systems, you start to see patterns emerge because you're not just observing one case, right? You're observing things, you know, hundreds of cases a day sometimes, right? It sort of depends on your role and what court you're working in, but definitely in municipal court because it is such a high volume court. And I think it's about being honest about what you're seeing, right? About speaking out about it and believing that a judge has a responsibility beyond the bench, right? You know, I think a judge should be a leader for the community. I think a judge should be an advocate for justice overall. And I don't think, I think that's totally appropriate. And I think it's a judge's responsibility. Right now, you know, most of the judges in municipal court, because of the way that the courtrooms are set up, it's like a half day court session. And so there's time right? To look into these things and to work on these things and try to improve the community. I mean, I think right now I'm very excited, not only about running and making some changes in municipal court, but I think that there are a lot of people in New Orleans that are excited about making changes, and I look forward to collaborating, I hope, right, with defenders and city attorneys or district attorneys about how can we make things better. I feel like there's a lot of positive optimism in the air, and so yeah, I think we can do a lot.
We're gonna get back on warrants for a minute. Nearly half of the warrants of those 55,000 we talked about 25,000 are warrants issued by municipal court judges for individuals who fail to return to court for payment status. Why was it a good idea to require people without means to return to municipal court repeatedly over many months to pay their fines? And when they missed one of their burdensome payment statuses, a warrant that is then issued for their arrest, should municipal court judges dismiss these warrants that are more than 3 years old or any time period? What do you suggest about handling these warrants about people who can't pay?
Yeah, it wasn't a good idea to do that, right? To continually have people coming back to court over and over again. It was never a good idea. And I think that first of all, I think that judges need to be very clear in their instructions, right? I think that sometimes certain things are said, but other things are implied that leave people with the idea that if they don't come back to court to pay, if they don't come back with money, that they're going to go to jail. I think sometimes judges will say, well, I wasn't going to put them in jail, right, because that's illegal. But I think sometimes the way that the message is conveyed to the average person, right, you have to think about how you feel when you're in court and it's a judge, and you're there because you've been charged with something. It's really intimidating, and then there's quite, a power differential there. So first of all, I think that should be explained to people. But second of all, yeah, I mean, I just think having people come back over and over again so that they can pay $5 here and $10 there. How many staff are working in the court while we're collecting our $5 or $10, $100, right? You have a judge, you have, a prosecutor, you have, defense, you have all the staff, the deputies, what have you. What are we really getting out of that? And I think sometimes there's almost this move of like just wanting people to like own up and, to teach them a lesson. And I think, people should follow the rules and people should follow court orders. But at some point, you have to be realistic about what are you doing and what are our priorities. Is a judge there to protect the community from crime, or is the judge like a middle school hall monitor? I don't want to be that person, right? I want to do things to help make our community safer. Can a judge dismiss the fines and fees? So historically, the fines and fees, the process in which the fines and fees were assessed in municipal court was not constitutional. And I think you would be hard pressed to go back and separate, wheat from chaff and figure out which were and which weren't, right? And so, yeah, I do think that it'd be appropriate for a judge to dismiss fines and fees. I also know that there have been amnesty plans in place in other cities that have been successful. Now, am I saying right now that I'm going to dismiss everybody's fines and fees 100%? No, I'm not saying that, because I have an ethical obligation to take a look at what's going on with the case and see what the details are before I make my decision, right? But do I personally think that that is probably a pragmatic way to deal with it? Absolutely.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. So, and several more questions, but let me see if I can go through here and get a good one, since we just have a few minutes left. Well, here's one that's just kind of a practical one. Many New Orleans have described their experience in municipal court, I'm going to raise my hand, as confusing and chaotic. Defendants do not know where to report. There is no information booth available in the court as you walk in, and defendants end up speaking to the prosecutor, first desk they see, just for simple court information. What can be done to make this court more friendly and less confusing? to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the attitude, and I think the judge sets the tone for the whole court, right? Yes, a judge should be a neutral arbiter. But I think that just because somebody is accused of a crime, it doesn't mean that as a judge, I'm not going to be rooting for them, wanting them to do well, wanting them to succeed and reach their personal goals and, you know, get the heck out of court and not have to come back, right? Nobody wants to come there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just about leadership from the bench. I think all of those things are doable. I think having, you know, an information desk to explain things to people is all really helpful. But I also think, you know, I've been a public defender for 15 years. And before that, I worked with people in supportive living. So I'm very accustomed to talking to people who are scared, who are stressed, and, you know, who have suffered from trauma and are just really not in their best place. And I'm really accustomed to being patient with people and explaining the legal system to them so that they can make the best choices for them. And I think that that is an asset that I will bring to the bench. I mean, I think it really is ultimately, like, you can put things into place, but it really is ultimately about showing people respect and understanding that every human being that comes before you should be treated with dignity. I mean, I think that that just kind of leads it all.
Well, you know that I'm going to take moderator's privilege here on this next question, because you mentioned the role of trauma, and so many people in court, you know, having experienced trauma, living through it, and the effects on these persons. As a judge, what can you do about that? What role can that play in the work that you do on the bench, other than just treating them as human beings? What can you do as a judge?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think just treating people as human beings goes a long way. There's words for it. They call it procedural justice. You can read about it. There's all these articles, but it really is just being respectful. But yeah, I think that, you know, part of when I talked about transparency, right? One of the things that I want to do is to look into, you know, what is the budget of the court and who can we hire to have in place to help inform what we do. And so for me, I want to have an open hiring process, right? Where I will select applicants based on their experience and or credentials to help me put in some policies that reflect, you know, being trauma informed. I'm a judge. I'm a lawyer, but I won't be a judge, right? And not a social worker. And so I think while, you know, I can do my best, I think sometimes it's best to have either a professional social worker or somebody at least that is trained in that background. And that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody with an MSW, right? It could be somebody who is a peer counselor or somebody who has been through a program like that. But yeah, I think having people on hand to help inform some of the decisions that the court makes could go a long way. But once again, I think getting through that backlog and getting through some of the nonsense is going to be probably the first priority so that we can spend our time on actually helping people get back on track and get back to their lives.
Thank you, and I took moderator's privilege there, but I think we have to wrap up at this point. Would you like to give you have a minute to give your closing statement or remarks to the community? Would you like to do that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for this opportunity, and I'm excited that I'm running. You know, I've been a public servant my entire adult life. I am the real deal. I've represented people in municipal court, magistrate court, district court, and juvenile court. I've gone to Baton Rouge to testify at the legislature about trying to improve our system. I've done the same thing in city council. I've had a lot of success changing very difficult systems over the course of my career. As you heard, I began my career during Katrina, and I am one of the founding members of the Public Defender's Office. I feel really confident that even though addressing a lot of the issues in municipal court are not going to be easy, I do think that I am the best person for the job. And I'd ask for everybody's support and for your vote on November 3rd. It's time that we take our courts back. to serve the people, regardless of race, regardless of money, regardless of gender identity, regardless of ability. The courts belong to the people, and I intend to serve the people.
Well, thank you very much for answering the community's questions. That's going to end the forum, and I will turn it back over to you, Liz.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan and Megan. And I just want to thank everyone who's been watching. I want to repeat something I said at the beginning, because I know for those watching on Facebook, we had a little hiccup getting it started right away. So we did invite all the candidates. Judge Paul Sens had originally accepted and then withdrew this past weekend. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we were trying to have a balanced forum here. And again, thank you to all of our co-hosts. I am the co-chair of the New Orleans Safety and Justice Challenge Community Advisory Group, and our co-host organizations were Court Watch Nola, Innocence Project New Orleans, SPLC Action Fund, Louisiana Courts Matter, National Council of Jewish Women, League of Women Voters New Orleans, Urban League of Louisiana, Crescent City Media Group, and Orleans Public Defenders. So thank you so much, everyone. And our next forum is actually in about 1 hour at 7 o'clock. We're going to have the Criminal District Court Section A candidates. So I hope you will go stretch your legs, get a drink of water, and come back at 7 o'clock for the next forum. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.